So we're going to start with a video. For folks that weren't aware, in 2020 we didn't host a conference, but we did go out to our partners in the community and ask them to make videos to share what they'd been up to in the 2019 season. And so on our Soil Rev website, if you go to the past conferences link, we have a whole bunch of videos for the 2020 year, and we're going to watch the Adapting Regenerative Ag Principles to Dryland Systems video produced by Megan Shapansky out of Colorado State University.
Megan Shapansky. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences at Colorado State University. And I'm going to give a very brief overview of some on-farm research we've conducted looking at adapting regenerative ag principles to the dryland systems of the High Plains. This research was producer-driven, it's systems-based, and working with producers that operate in a highly variable and low rainfall environment, but are still committed to improving soil health and sustainability goals while balancing short and long-term economics. And this is what I mean is pulling these together to think about what are the regenerative management systems and principles. I was very fortunate to work with an amazing team on a project here funded by NRCS, collaborators both at Colorado State University, Kansas State University, and an amazing group of producers who really guided the research questions and were incredibly generous with their time, their resources in this project. So our overall objective was to evaluate the potential of grazed cover crops to improve soil health and net profitability. The image here shows on the map where the circles are. Those are where the fields were, where we did the research. Most of those are in the 15 to 20 inch annual precipitation range. This range is typically, the crop rotation is 1 year of winter wheat and then a 14-month fallow period to store soil moisture and stabilize wheat yields. And so we were looking at different ways to diversify these rotations, and these producers were specifically interested in how do we adapt cover cropping practices to our water-limited environments. So all of the research then was conducted on farmers' fields. The farmers agreed, they designed and selected a single mixture that they all grew on their farms for the different years of the study, and that each field was then broken into 4 different blocks. The bulk of the area then was used for grazing in a rotational or stripped grazing format. And then within each of those blocks, we established these grazing exclosures and a small fallow area where cover crops were removed. So I'm going to talk about 2 different windows that we evaluated. So we did 2 years of each window where cover crops were planted in the spring, 1 year in March of that year, and then grazed early summer. It was a very short grazing window, only 30 days. And then there was a short fallow period before wheat was planted that fall. And then we followed those wheat fields until the following year and looked at yields. Here's an image of those spring planted fields. You'll see on the right there is the mixture dominated by cool season grasses, especially oats and barley. You'll see a little canola in there, a little flax, a little sunflower. But those crops matured really quickly at this time of the year, this early summer growth period, which meant excellent forage, but very short grazing period. However, also as the cattle moved through, we had excellent regrowth opportunity behind those cattle. The other window we looked at was after wheat harvest, so planting a cover crop in July or August. Grazing varied a lot across the farms, whether it started before or after the freeze or the frost, and grazing ended then sometimes late into the winter, and then those fields were planted to a summer crop the next year. So here's an image. The image on the left, you can see that these were now dominated by warm season grasses, especially things like sorghum and sorghum Sudan grass, sunflowers as well. Some of this image here shows cattle in there grazing before the first hard frost. And then most of the farms, though, grazed more like that image on the right, where the cover crop biomass basically was stockpiled and grazed after frost. And then that allowed for much more flexibility on the length of grazing. So to summarize really quickly what we found, and then I'll point you to resources if you want to dig a little bit deeper. With the spring planted cover crops, we found that the planting timing was important by about mid-March or so. Planting much later than that gave the weeds more of a chance to get established along with the cover crops. Because of that high growth potential at that time of year, there was really good regrowth as the cattle moved across the field, so good residue cover even with the grazing. Very high quality forage, but also again a very short 30-day period for grazing. Animal performance was excellent. And then growing these cover crops for just a short period of time, only about 3 months, we saw significant increases in soil aggregation in the grazed and ungrazed cover crops relative to our fallow periods in both years of the study. And then one of the concerns was about grazing and the cattle increasing soil compaction, but we did not see general trends of increased soil compaction. Growing a cover crop relative to not did reduce soil moisture, especially at deeper soil depths, and that did have a consequence for the next year's wheat yields, reducing yields an average of 10 bushels per acre. However, when we factor in both reduced and increased costs and income, we see that reduced herbicide inputs were needed with the use of the cover crops. Having the livestock increased some costs for labor and fencing. However, it also diversified and created another income stream. And the net of those different activities was variable across the farms, but a net positive. So in general, these grazed cover crops were both profitable and improved soil health in the very short term. The post-wheat planted was somewhat similar in some respects and then different in others. So again, we're able to, with the producers guiding the management of the grazing, they were able to leave quite a bit of residue cover behind, even though this window had much less regrowth. Animal performance was more variable because there was different quality of the forage depending on when producers chose to graze. However, that performance really wasn't different than grazing animals on native range at that time of year. And again, just like the spring planted, the most sensitive soil measure we found was aggregation, where we saw increased soil aggregation, especially actually in this situation with the ungrazed cover crops relative to our fallow controls. Aggregation is really important for water infiltration in these water-limited regions. However, we also still saw reduced soil moisture where we grew the cover crops relative to fallow, especially at deeper depths. The cover crops again provided good weed suppression. However, that post-wheat planting window was much more risky in terms of needing those late monsoonal summer rains, which can be more variable. And so depending on when that cover crop got planted and whether they received those rains or not, there was a higher risk of failure of the planting or insufficient growth to support grazing. And then there was also some concerns raised among some of increased potential for disease transmission of some of the species within the mixtures to nearby wheat fields, say of viruses and other diseases. So there's much more flexibility on timing in this window, but there's also more risks associated with it. So if you want to dig more deeply into some of the specific results and other things we measured, I encourage you to visit the website drylandag.org or send me an email. I'm really excited that some of these producers have then partnered with the Colorado Conservation Tillage Association to continue engaging in research to understand the long-term dynamics of these systems for soil health as well as profitability. Thanks for your time.
All right, yeah, Megan's a great speaker. If you ever get a chance to see her talk about her research, I always find it really interesting. We have another poll going into our next speaker. So what are you doing to limit soil disturbance? If you want to head to menti.com and put in at least one answer, if not more. So our options are rotating perennials in with annuals, reducing the number of tillage events in a season, switching from moldboard plowing to chisel plowing, switching to strip tillage or permanent bed system, or going no-till or into perennial production. All All right, it looks like reducing the number of tillage events is very popular, as well as going into perennial production. Both very good options for keeping the soil aggregated.